Poor rejected maid buys a ruined haunted cabin. Seconds later. Kaylee pushed open the heavy door, the rusty hinges crying out into the silence. Her flashlight flickered across the room, revealing broken furniture, cracked floors, and walls covered in dust. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling from cold and fear. It wasn't the kind of place anyone would want, but for Kaylee, it was the only thing she could afford. Her savings, $800, were gone, and this ruined cabin was now all she had left. The light caught something strange, scratched words across the wall that read, "Help them. They're still here." Her heart started to race. Suddenly, the air grew colder. Her breath came out in white puffs. From somewhere deep inside the cabin came a soft sound, a child crying. Kaylee froze. Every part of her wanted to run. But where would she go? Her car was gone, her job lost, her hope fading. The crying grew louder. She tightened her grip on the flashlight and stepped forward. What she did next would shock everyone who heard her story. What would you do if you bought a haunted house and had nowhere else to go? Drop your answer below and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's story will change how you see everything. It's time start go to the very beginning. Kindly come with us. For 12 years, Kaylee worked in the grand homes of Portland's West Hills. Every morning, she took the bus before sunrise, dressed in her neat uniform, hair tied back, shoes polished. The Patterson house was her second home. She cleaned every inch of it with quiet pride, the marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the white carpets Mrs. Patterson was so protective of. Kaylee never complained. She was invisible but trusted, and that trust was all she had. That changed the day Mrs. Patterson's diamond bracelet disappeared. Kaylee remembered folding laundry in the master bedroom when her employer stormed in, eyes sharp and cold. "Where is it, Kaylee?" "My bracelet. It was right here." Kaylee froze, confused. She offered to help search, but Mrs. Patterson only grew louder. The security footage was reviewed. Kaylee was the only one seen entering the room that day. There was no proof she took it, but there was no proof she didn't. By noon, she was out the door, her paycheck withheld, her name whispered through the neighborhood. Within days, no one in Portland's domestic worker network would return her calls. Word traveled fast, the maid who stole from her employer. She walked from one house to another, hoping for another chance, but every door closed on her. Her small savings vanished as she tried to survive. Rent for her one-bedroom apartment in Lentz was due. Her landlord gave her a week to clear out. She packed her life into 3 suitcases and watched the view of Mount Hood disappear in her rearview mirror. For 3 weeks, her car became her only home. A faded blue 1998 Honda Civic parked at Powell Butte Nature Park. She learned to sleep with the seat pushed back and her jacket pulled tight against the cold October air. At night, condensation froze on the windows. The sound of coyotes in the distance reminded her she was alone. Some nights, she woke to headlights sweeping across her face when rangers made their rounds. They didn't stop. They never did. During the day, she sat in the Multnomah County Library downtown, near Burnside Street. It was warm there. She plugged her phone into the wall socket, scrolled through job boards, and watched people in suits sip coffee and type on laptops. Nobody looked at her twice. She stopped wearing makeup. She stopped caring how she looked. Every hour stretched endlessly, one long reminder of everything she had lost. By the second week, the gas tank was nearly empty. She used gas station bathrooms to wash up, brushing her teeth under flickering lights, praying no one would notice her carrying all her belongings. Sometimes, she skipped meals to save money. Sometimes, she cried quietly, afraid someone might hear. The hardest part wasn't the hunger, it was the feeling that she no longer existed. Hope slipped away little by little. Each rejection chipped another piece off her dignity. Every morning, she stared at her reflection in the car mirror and whispered, "Just one more day, Kaylee. Hold on one more day." But even that began to sound like a lie. When the rain started, she pressed her palms to the steering wheel and thought about driving anywhere, even if she didn't know where to go. But she couldn't waste gas. Portland's skyline blurred through her tears. Everything familiar had turned cold. She was forgotten, discarded, a ghost in her own city. She didn't know it yet, but that final night in the car, the night she almost gave up completely, was the same night her life would take a turn that no one could have predicted. The library had become Kaylee's only refuge. She spent her days at a corner table on the second floor, close to the heater, pretending to browse jobs while her stomach growled quietly. That morning, grey light spilled through the tall windows, and rain streaked across the glass. She was tired, hungry, and on the edge of giving up. She typed "affordable housing Oregon" into the search bar, again, and got the same meaningless results. Apartments were too expensive, shelters were full, and motels cost more than her entire week's budget. Scrolling down, her eye caught something strange on a local government website: Clatsop County Sheriff's Auction, abandoned properties. Out of boredom more than hope, she clicked. The list was short, mostly farmland, wrecked trailers, and one item that made her stop: property number 3412, cabin, 2 acres, Saddle Mountain Forest. Starting bid, $800. Condition: abandoned 43 years. Reports of paranormal activity and unexplained deaths. Sold as is. No refunds. Buyer assumes all liability. She blinked, thinking it was a joke. She clicked through to the photos, and her stomach turned. The first image showed a small cabin half swallowed by vines, its roof caved in like broken ribs. Another showed shattered windows, their glass coated in grime. The walls were streaked with something dark and dried, like blood. The description didn't hide the horror: multiple previous owners abandoned property within days. Cause undisclosed. It sounded like something from a bad movie, but Kaylee couldn't look away. There was a strange honesty in the listing, a bluntness that almost felt human. No false promises, no polished words. Just the truth: ugly, dangerous, and waiting. She clicked on the bid button out of curiosity. The timer said 3 hours left. Current bid, $800. No bidders. Her heart raced. She opened her wallet. Inside were a few crumpled bills, her debit card, and a note she had written to herself weeks earlier: "Don't stop trying." Her account balance, $847. That was all she had left in the world. She leaned back in her chair, her pulse loud in her ears. $800 for 2 acres of land, even if it was cursed, was still land. Still something that could be hers. No landlord could evict her. No boss could fire her from it. For the first time in months, the thought of ownership flickered like a small flame inside her. But logic fought back. What if the rumors were true? What if the place wasn't safe? She looked around the library, people studying, tapping keyboards, living ordinary lives, and felt something sharp twist inside her. No one was coming to save her. Nobody even saw her anymore. She was already living in fear, already sleeping in darkness. Maybe it didn't matter if the cabin had ghosts or not. The real world had already taken everything from her. She whispered to herself, "It can't be worse than this." Her finger hovered over the bid button. The screen asked, "Are you sure?" She hesitated for a moment longer, then clicked yes. A red banner appeared. "You are the current highest bidder." She refreshed the page over and over as the minutes passed. No new bids came in. The seconds ticked down, 45 minutes, then 20, then 10. Her hands trembled. She didn't know whether to pray she won or pray she didn't. When the timer finally hit 0, the page refreshed once more. Auction closed. Congratulations to the winning bidder, Kaylee W. She stared at the words for a long time, her throat tight. She expected to feel regret, but something else came instead, a slow, cautious sense of belonging. For the first time since losing her job, she had something again. Not much, but hers. The property's address appeared in her confirmation email, Cedar Hollow Road, 12 miles east of Astoria. She copied it into her phone and traced the route on the map. It was deep in the forest, past the last gas station, surrounded by nothing but trees and fog. No neighbors. No help. Just quiet. Kaylee closed her laptop and sat still for a long time, listening to the rain tapping against the windows. Her heartbeat slowed, and she whispered under her breath, "Maybe this is my second chance." Outside, Portland's sky turned darker. People hurried through puddles with umbrellas. Kaylee packed her things into her worn backpack, checked the balance on her phone, $47 left, and walked toward the exit. Her shoes squeaked on the marble floor. No one looked up. In the parking lot, she climbed into her old Civic, turned the key, and watched the engine struggle before starting. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but it was hers to take. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely hopeless. A haunted cabin in the woods wasn't the dream she ever had, but it was the only dream left. Kaylee left Portland before sunrise. The city lights faded behind her as Highway 30 opened ahead, 90 miles of twisting road following the wide, dark ribbon of the Columbia River. The Civic's heater barely worked, and the windshield fogged easily, forcing her to wipe it every few minutes with an old scarf. The rain came in soft sheets, blurring the world beyond the glass. But she kept driving, eyes fixed forward, repeating the address in her head like a quiet prayer. Cedar Hollow Road, 12 miles east of Astoria. She passed the industrial outskirts of the city first, warehouses, empty parking lots, and the occasional truck stop glowing in the dawn. Then came St. Helens, its river docks barely visible through the mist. The further she drove, the fewer cars she saw. Civilization fell away mile by mile, replaced by forests pressing closer to the road. Tall evergreens loomed like silent watchers. The world felt older out here, untouched. By the time she reached Clatskanie, the landscape had changed completely. The flat gray skies gave way to rolling hills blanketed in moss and ferns. The rain had stopped, replaced by a strange fog that drifted across the road like smoke. Kaylee cracked the window slightly and smelled salt in the air. The ocean was close. For a moment, she felt calm. The air was clean, the kind that filled your lungs and made you feel alive again. Maybe, she thought, this place could be different. Maybe the rumors about the cabin were just stories people told to scare buyers away. But as the miles passed, that fragile sense of hope began to thin. When the highway curved toward Astoria, she caught her first glimpse of the coastal town below, a patchwork of rooftops and old buildings climbing steep hillsides, the famous Astoria column rising in the distance. She remembered seeing it in an old movie once, a story about adventure and friendship. The sight should have comforted her. Instead, it made her realize how far away from everything she truly was. Her phone signal disappeared just outside the city limits. The GPS arrow froze mid-turn, leaving her to rely on the printed map she had scribbled from the library computer. She turned off the main road onto a smaller one, Cedar Hollow Road, and the world instantly grew quieter. The asphalt was cracked and uneven, lined by thick trees that seemed to close in the deeper she went. After a few miles, the road turned to gravel, then to mud. The Civic groaned and skidded as she drove through deep ruts filled with brown water. Branches scraped the sides of the car, and every turn looked the same. A sign half buried in moss appeared at a fork in the road, Saddle Mountain Trailhead, 5 miles. She knew the cabin was nearby. Her stomach tightened as she continued slowly, headlights cutting through the fog. The forest was so dense now that daylight barely reached the ground. Finally, through the mist, she saw it. The cabin sat on a small clearing of uneven ground, leaning slightly to one side as though the earth had given up trying to hold it. The roof sagged in the middle. Moss hung from the eaves like old hair. One window was completely gone, another cracked like a spider web. The front door was ajar, swinging gently as if moved by breath instead of wind. Her headlights illuminated it for a brief second, then flickered. Kaylee parked and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was so complete it felt heavy. No birds called. No insects buzzed. Even the trees stood unnaturally still. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, watching. She stepped out of the car, her boots sinking into soft mud. The air was damp and smelled faintly of rotten rain. She could hear her own breathing, the distant drip of water from the branches above, and nothing else. Not even the faint hum of wind. Every instinct told her to stay in the car and leave. But she had nowhere else to go. This was her home now, for better or worse. She grabbed her flashlight from the passenger seat and walked toward the porch. The boards creaked under her weight. The walls were covered in layers of green moss, and a colony of vines had crawled up the side, wrapping around the chimney like skeletal fingers. At the doorway, she stopped. Something carved into the frame caught her eye. Symbols. Dozens of them. Circles with lines through them, crosses, and what looked like letters from a language she didn't recognize. Some were burned into the wood, others scratched deep with a knife. Beneath them, faint words barely visible beneath the decay read, "Stay away. Do not enter after dark." Her flashlight flickered again. Kaylee swallowed hard. She ran her hand across one of the carvings. It felt rough, jagged, desperate. She wondered who made them, and whether they had escaped whatever they were warning about. The open door waited in front of her, darkness spilling out from inside like a shadow made solid. For a long moment, she stood there, gripping the flashlight so tightly her knuckles whitened. The silence stretched, thick and endless. Finally, she took a step forward. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, like it hadn't moved in decades. Kaylee stepped through the doorway and the floor groaned beneath her. Her flashlight swept across overturned chairs, a rusted stove, and fragments of shattered glass that glinted faintly in the beam. Dust hung thick in the air. The smell was sharp, mold, damp wood, and something faintly metallic. She took a slow step forward. Every board complained under her weight. The walls were warped, swollen from years of rain leaking through the roof. She passed a fallen picture frame, its glass cracked, the image inside too faded to recognize. Something scurried across the floor and disappeared into a hole. Animal droppings littered the corners. Her light moved up the wall, and stopped. Deep scratches covered it from floor to ceiling. Long, desperate lines gouged into the wood as if made by hands or claws. The same marks repeated across every surface. Some cut through old wallpaper, some even across the ceiling. They overlapped so much it looked as if someone had tried to escape, or warned someone who would come after. The air grew colder as she moved deeper inside. Her breath came out white. The beam of her flashlight shook as she turned toward the far wall. There, written in uneven letters, was the message she had seen in the photos: "Help them. They're still here. They're waiting." The words weren't just painted, they looked smeared, uneven, like they had been written in something thick and dark. She took a step closer, trying to make sense of it. Her stomach twisted. She could almost feel the desperation behind every stroke. From somewhere in the back room came a slow scraping sound. Kaylee froze. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It sounded like wood dragging against wood, something shifting. Her light darted toward the sound, but the narrow hallway was swallowed in shadow. The temperature dropped again, biting into her skin. She could see her breath now, every exhale hanging in the air. Her fingers went numb around the flashlight. A soft hum began to fill the space, low, steady, almost like a voice humming from far away. It was joined by a faint tapping, rhythmic and uneven, like footsteps moving across a wooden floor. She called out softly, her voice shaking. "Hello." The sound stopped. For a heartbeat, the entire cabin went silent. The silence pressed against her ears. Then, from the back bedroom, the scraping returned, slow, closer this time. Kaylee stepped toward the sound, one hand gripping the wall to steady herself. The floor creaked with every movement. The beam of light reached the doorway, and she saw her reflection in a cracked mirror hanging on the far side. But it wasn't just her reflection. Behind her shoulder, something faint flickered. She turned quickly. Nothing. The mirror, however, began to frost over right before her eyes. Thin crystals spread across the surface, delicate and sharp, crawling outward until the glass was almost white. The humming grew louder. Her flashlight flickered once, twice, then steadied again. That's when she saw it. In the corner of the room stood a figure, a young woman, almost transparent, her body faintly glowing in the darkness. She wore a long, old-fashioned dress, torn and faded, her hair falling over her face. Her shoulders trembled as if she were crying, but no sound came out. Only the faint rise and fall of her form, like breath that didn't belong to the living. Kaylee's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed for her to run, to get out, to never look back. But she didn't move. She saw the way the figure's hands trembled, the way her head bowed, and felt something she hadn't in a long time, compassion. Her voice came out quiet but steady. "I'm not here to hurt you." The air in the room seemed to shift, as though the cabin itself had been waiting for those words. The humming stopped. The frost on the mirror glowed faintly before melting away. Then a sound, not through her ears, but inside her mind. A voice soft as wind in leaves. "Help us. We've been alone so long. Please don't leave us alone." Tears filled Kaylee's eyes. Her flashlight dimmed until only the outline of the woman remained. The message on the wall behind her seemed to shimmer in the faint light, the words now clearer, louder somehow without sound. Kaylee took one step forward, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. "Who are you?" she whispered. But the answer didn't come as words. Instead, the temperature fell again, colder than before. The mirror shattered with a sound that rang through the cabin like a scream. The light went out completely, and in the blackness that followed, the voice returned, stronger, closer, and filled with grief. "Help us, before it happens again." Kaylee gasped, fumbling for her flashlight, her breath quick and shallow. She turned it back on, but the figure was gone. Only the broken mirror remained, its shards scattered across the floor, each one reflecting her terrified face from a different angle. The cabin was silent once more, but the message on the wall seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light, as if it were breathing. Writing. Kaylee couldn't move at first. The moment her palm brushed the cold, cracked wall, visions surged through her mind, flashes so vivid they made her gasp for air. They weren't dreams. They weren't hers. Snow whipping through the night. A man in a thick coat shouting into the wind. A woman clutching 3 children near a fireplace that had gone out. A lantern flickering. Cries swallowed by the storm. Each image hit her like a heartbeat echoing from another lifetime. The smell of smoke, the sting of frost, the creak of old wood bending under heavy snow, it was all real in her mind. Kaylee stumbled back, clutching her belly, trembling as the images formed a story that unfolded piece by piece. She saw a man with kind eyes, a logger by his tools and calloused hands. His wife, a teacher, reading stories aloud to their 3 children by the fire. Laughter filled that cabin once, simple, warm, and full of life. The family had lived there since 1952, making do with little, building joy from the small things. Fresh bread cooling by the window, children chasing one another around the yard, and the father's boots leaving prints that the morning tide sometimes washed away. But in the winter of 1962, Oregon faced one of its worst storms. Wind roared through the coastal forest with the force of 1,000 waves, burying everything in ice and snow. The father had gone out to check on the animals before nightfall, promising he'd be back before the fire dimmed. He never returned. Kaylee could feel the wife's terror, the way she had pressed her children close as the cold crept deeper into their bones. The storm howled for days, shaking the cabin until the roof groaned. She screamed for help, but no one heard. Roads were gone, the world frozen in white. The children cried until their voices faded, until silence claimed the night. By the time spring came and the searchers found the cabin, all that remained were the outlines of the life they had built and lost. The locals buried them quietly, and over time, the memory of the Hendricks family faded. The cabin, left to rot, became a place of whispered stories. People said they heard crying on windy nights, or the sound of a mother calling her children's names. Some claimed they felt small hands tugging at their sleeves, begging not to be left alone. For 60 years, no one stayed long. Owners came and went, spooked by the unshakable sadness that hung over the place like fog. Kaylee leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. She understood now, this wasn't a curse. It was grief, suspended in time. The Hendricks weren't vengeful, they were alone. Forgotten. Waiting for someone to hear them, to remember that they had lived and mattered. She closed her eyes, letting tears spill freely. In their loneliness, she recognized her own reflection. She had been cast aside, too, by her employer, by society, by life itself. The memory of her nights sleeping in her car, her belly growing heavier each week, came back with raw force. The same ache the Hendricks had felt, the fear of being unseen, unheard, erased, was the same one she'd carried inside her for years. The air in the cabin changed. The temperature dropped, but it wasn't the bitter cold of anger. It was sorrow made visible. Kaylee could almost hear a faint whisper, soft as breath against her ear. A woman's voice, tired, trembling, saying, "Please, help them." She opened her eyes and saw the faint outline of figures, shapes moving like shadows caught in moonlight. A woman kneeling beside 3 children. They didn't look frightening. They looked afraid. Lost. One of the smallest, a little boy with curly hair, seemed to reach out to her, his hand trembling as if asking to be held. Kaylee's knees gave way, and she fell onto the dusty floorboards, crying openly. "I see you," she whispered through sobs. "I know what happened." The figures seemed to pause, their outlines flickering like candlelight. The walls that had always felt oppressive now seemed to breathe with her. For the first time since she'd stepped foot inside, Kaylee didn't feel like an intruder. She felt like she'd been brought there for a reason. The wind outside howled through the broken window frame, carrying with it a faint cry that no longer sounded angry, just desperate. Kaylee pressed a hand against her heart, whispering into the air, "You're not alone anymore." The room seemed to sigh, a long, weary exhale that carried 60 years of silence. She didn't know how to explain it, but she could feel their gratitude. A warmth touched her shoulder, so soft it could have been a breeze or a hand. She didn't flinch this time. Instead, she let it stay there. For once, she wasn't afraid of what she couldn't see. As the visions faded, she understood the full truth. The Hendricks family hadn't been haunting the cabin. The cabin had been haunting the memory of them. Every creak, every gust, every whisper was their story trying to be told. They weren't the problem, they were the message. Kaylee sat in the quiet that followed, the glow from her lantern flickering against the aged boards. She looked around at the decay, the collapsed beams, and the layers of dust that told 6 decades of abandonment. And for the first time, she saw beauty beneath the ruin. Not the kind seen by the eye, but the kind felt by the soul, the persistence of love, the echo of lives that refused to vanish. Her body trembled, not from fear but from the enormity of what she now carried. She wasn't just a woman who had found a broken shack. She was the first person in 60 years to listen. Kaylee whispered into the still air, her voice steady now. "I'll remember you. I promise." Outside, the wind eased. Snow that had begun to fall slowed to a gentle drift. The forest grew quiet, as if the world itself was listening. Kaylee knew that the truth had finally been spoken, and that her life, like the cabin's, was about to change forever. Kaylee stayed kneeling on the cold floor, watching as the faint outlines of the figures hovered near the broken hearth. The woman, once a mother, had her arms wrapped around 3 small children. Their faces flickered like candlelight through fog, terrified yet longing to be seen. The eldest girl clutched something close to her chest, perhaps a toy or book she had tried to keep warm. The youngest boy pressed into his mother's skirt, trembling. Their mother looked straight at Kaylee, her face filled with exhaustion and a pleading kind of sorrow. "I see you," Kaylee whispered again, her voice shaking. "I know what happened. I know you didn't want to be forgotten." The words seemed to hang in the air, weightless and true. The cabin shuddered softly, as if exhaling after years of holding its breath. The bitter cold that had filled the room shifted. It didn't vanish completely, but it softened, losing the crushing heaviness that had made it unbearable. Kaylee wiped her tears with the sleeve of her jacket. "You're not alone anymore," she said quietly. "I'll stay. I'll fix this place. I'll make sure people remember you." She sat in silence after that, unsure if the figures were still there or if her eyes were playing tricks. But the oppressive sadness was lighter now, like fog thinning as the sun rose somewhere unseen. The air no longer felt hostile. It felt listening. That night, Kaylee didn't dare sleep inside. The cabin's floorboards were half-rotted, and her nerves still trembled from everything she'd seen. She made her way to her car, parked at the tree line, and curled beneath an old blanket that barely covered her growing belly. The temperature dropped, and frost crept along the windows, but she didn't feel as hopeless as before. For the first time in years, there was purpose in her heart. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, whispering through the pines like a lullaby. She could almost hear a woman's soft hum beneath it, the same voice she'd heard earlier, only calmer now. Kaylee closed her eyes, pressing her hands against her stomach. "We'll be okay," she murmured to the tiny life inside her. "We'll make this our home." When dawn broke, the coastal forest was drenched in silver fog. Mist rolled over the mossy ground, curling around the car like a living thing. Rays of pale light fought through the haze, brushing the roof of the cabin with soft gold. Kaylee stepped out, stretching her stiff legs, and breathed in the damp, clean air. It smelled of salt, earth, and new beginnings. She walked to the cabin's porch, her boots crunching on the frosted ground. "Good morning," she said softly into the silence, feeling faintly ridiculous but unable to stop herself. "It's going to be a long day, but we'll start small." With her last $47, she drove into Astoria and bought what she could: bleach, gloves, sponges, nails, a broom, and a few trash bags. The store clerk gave her a strange look when she mentioned the cabin near the ridge. "You mean that old haunted place?" he asked. "Nobody's lived there in decades." Kaylee only smiled faintly. Maybe it's time someone did. By mid-morning, she was back, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing years of grime from the cracked walls and broken windowsills. Every sweep of her hand left trails of clean wood beneath the dust, like the cabin itself was waking up. She spoke aloud as she worked, telling the unseen family about herself, how she had been fired, how she had nowhere to go, how people looked past her as though she didn't exist. "We're both rejected," she said to the air. "Both forgotten. But we do matter. You mattered. You still do." She didn't expect an answer, But as she lifted the broom again, something small rolled out from under the old table, a rusty nail that landed right beside the empty space she'd been about to repair. She froze, staring. Her hammer, which she was sure she'd left near the doorway, now rested neatly beside her bucket. A nervous laugh escaped her lips. "Thanks," she whispered. The longer she worked, the more she noticed things like that. The rag she thought she'd lost reappeared on the step when she turned around. A loose board she'd been struggling with suddenly shifted into place, fitting perfectly without her forcing it. When exhaustion pulled at her arms and she felt close to giving up, the air would grow warmer, a faint scent of pine and baked bread drifting through the space. It was subtle, but comforting, like someone encouraging her silently to keep going. By afternoon, she had cleared enough of the front room to reveal the stone fireplace. Beneath a layer of dirt, she found a scorched metal pot and what looked like a child's wooden toy horse. She picked it up carefully, brushing away the soot until its simple carving emerged. 2 ears, a flat snout, 1 missing leg. Kaylee held it against her heart. "You kept it all this time," she whispered. "You didn't give up either." When the sun began to sink, the fog returned, swirling low through the trees. The cabin stood a little straighter now, its windows cleared enough to let in the faint glow of evening light. Kaylee stepped back to look at her progress. It was still battered and broken, but she could see what it once was, a home. Not a cursed ruin, but a place built with love that had never truly left. She sat on the porch step, sipping from an old thermos of lukewarm coffee, her body aching in every muscle. "I don't know how long this will take," she said softly. "But I'll stay. I'll fix it, one board at a time." The wind rustled through the tall firs, and she heard the faintest sound, laughter. Children's laughter, distant but gentle, carried through the air like the memory of a happier day. Kaylee smiled, tears filling her eyes. She didn't look around or question it. She just listened, letting the sound wash over her like sunlight through rain. Night settled slowly. She walked back to her car, climbed inside, and looked at the cabin one last time before sleep. A dim light flickered from inside, though she knew she'd left no lamp burning. It wasn't frightening. It was beautiful, soft, golden, almost alive. Kaylee leaned her head against the seat and whispered into the dark, "Thank you for letting me stay." The forest hushed around her. Somewhere in the distance, the tide rolled against the cliffs. The cabin stood quietly beneath the fog, no longer a place of fear but of fragile hope. For the first time in years, Kaylee drifted to sleep with peace in her heart and a promise in her soul. She would not leave them forgotten. She would rebuild what time and grief had taken, and in doing so, rebuild herself. It started with a rumor. Someone in town said they'd seen a woman living at the old Hendricks cabin, the one everyone swore was cursed. A few dismissed it as gossip, but by the end of the week, it spread across Astoria like wildfire. "There's someone fixing it up," the whispers went. "She talks to the ghosts like they're her family." One rainy afternoon, a reporter from the Daily Asterian drove up the narrow forest road expecting to find a squatter or someone lost to delusion. Instead, he found Kaylee on her knees near the porch, scrubbing years of dirt from the stone foundation. Her jacket was ripped at the sleeve, her boots soaked through, but her movements were steady, determined. When he introduced himself, she didn't flinch or hide. "You're welcome to look around," she said simply. "I'm trying to give them their home back." He frowned, notebook in hand. "Them." "The family that used to live here. The Hendricks. They didn't mean to leave. The storm took them, and people forgot. I just don't want that to happen again." The man stayed for nearly 2 hours, asking questions, taking photos, listening to her story about the auction, the visions, and the promise she made. He noticed how the air inside felt calm, even comforting, nothing like the haunted legends he'd heard growing up. Before leaving, he asked one last question. Why do you care so much about strangers who've been gone for 60 years? Kaylee looked out at the fog drifting through the pines. Because I know what it's like to be invisible. The article appeared 3 days later. The headline read, "Woman Gives Home to Forgotten Tragedy." It told both stories. The Hendricks family who died in the Great Winter Storm of 1962 and the homeless maid who found purpose among their ghosts. The piece was tender, heartfelt, and honest. It spread through Clatsop County overnight. By the weekend, people began showing up. A retired contractor from Warrenton arrived in a dented pickup truck loaded with lumber. "Can't have you rebuilding with your bare hands," he said gruffly, unloading the boards. He didn't charge a cent. The following Monday, a small group of Astoria High School students came by, curious but cautious. They brought paintbrushes, gloves, and sandwiches. One of them, a tall boy with red hair, said afterward, "I thought this place would feel cold, but it's peaceful. Like it's waiting for us." Kaylee smiled. Maybe it was. Within days, more people joined. A local church held a small fundraiser to help pay for a roofer. The town's historical society brought records, photographs, and yellowed newspaper clippings that confirmed everything she'd seen in her visions. They found the names of the lost family: Thomas, the father and logger; Catherine, the mother and schoolteacher; and their 3 children, Daniel, Ruth, and little Joseph. Kaylee read their names aloud in the cabin's main room, her voice trembling. "Now you're not just shadows," she said softly. "You have names again." Work continued for weeks. The community patched the roof, replaced shattered windows, and rebuilt the leaning porch. Someone donated insulation. A woman from a local bakery brought warm bread every Friday, saying she felt pulled to do so. Even visitors who came out of curiosity ended up staying to help. Despite its grim reputation, people said the place felt strangely peaceful. Some claimed to hear faint laughter while working. Others said the air grew warmer when they spoke kindly or prayed aloud. Kaylee never confirmed nor denied anything. She simply smiled, thanked them, and kept going. By early December, the transformation was astonishing. The structure stood solid for the first time in decades. The broken shingles were replaced, the cracked glass gleamed with sunlight, and the forest around it seemed to reclaim its color. Inside, one small room near the front had been turned into a simple memorial museum. Old photographs hung on the walls, donated by the Historical Society and cleaned by Kaylee's careful hands. In one, Catherine Hendricks stood in front of the cabin's porch with her children, smiling proudly. Beneath it, a short paragraph told their story, ending with a line that read, "Some homes never truly die, they wait to be remembered." Visitors came daily now. Some left flowers. Others brought notes of gratitude or whispered prayers. People who'd lost loved ones in storms or tragedies felt drawn to the place, saying it gave them peace. Kaylee often stood by the door, welcoming them with tea or quiet conversation. When funds came in from donations, she commissioned a small memorial plaque made of Cannon Beach granite. It was placed on a stone near the porch, etched with care. In memory of the Hendricks family, Thomas, Catherine, Daniel, Ruth, and Joseph. Taken by winter's fury but forgotten by no one. The night the plaque was installed, the town gathered under a blanket of soft rain. Lanterns glowed along the path, and the forest seemed to hum with life. Kaylee stood beside the contractor, the students, the church group, and strangers who had become friends. She said a few words, not rehearsed, just from the heart. "They weren't ghosts haunting us," she said. "They were memories waiting for someone to listen." When the final lantern was placed, something subtle changed in the air. A warmth filled the cabin, not from any fire or light, but from within. The shadows softened, and the familiar chill that once clung to the place lifted entirely. People felt it at once, a quiet peace settling over everything, gentle and absolute. Later that night, long after the others left, Kaylee remained inside. She lay on the old cot she had brought weeks earlier, listening to the rain against the new roof. For the first time since she'd lost everything, she didn't feel like an intruder or a survivor. She felt home. The quiet around her was alive in a way she couldn't explain. Soft footsteps upstairs, a faint lullaby humming through the beams, the kind of presence that brought comfort, not fear. She smiled through her tears. "You can rest now," she whispered into the dark. "You're remembered." The room grew warm again, and for a brief moment, she could swear she heard the laughter of children fading softly into sleep. Kaylee closed her eyes, breathing deeply, letting the peace of that moment fill her. That night, she slept inside the cabin for the first time, unafraid, unguarded, and no longer alone. January came with a sharp cold that froze the ground around the cabin. The forest was quiet, coated in frost, every branch glimmering under the pale morning sun. Kaylee had just returned from town with groceries when she noticed a silver sedan parked by the gate, a car too new and too clean for that lonely road. A woman stepped out, wrapped in a heavy coat. Her hair was white, her face marked with lines of both kindness and years. She introduced herself softly. "I'm Dorothy Patterson," she said. Kaylee froze. She recognized the last name immediately. Dorothy explained she was Mrs. Patterson's mother-in-law. "I read about you in the paper," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I had to see you myself." They sat inside near the small wood stove as Dorothy told her why she'd come. During the holidays, her son and daughter-in-law had hired cleaners to redo the old bedroom. The missing bracelet, the one that destroyed Kaylee's life, was found behind the dresser, coated in dust. No one had stolen anything. It had fallen and been forgotten. Dorothy's eyes filled with regret. "I told her to call you. To apologize. She wouldn't. Said it was in the past." She shook her head. "But it isn't. Not for you. You lost everything because of us." Kaylee didn't speak for a moment. The fire popped softly. "It's all right," she said finally, though part of her still ached. "What's done is done. I found something better here." Dorothy reached into her bag and handed her an envelope. Inside was a check for $15,000. "It's not enough to make up for what happened," she said, "but maybe it can help finish what you've started." Kaylee blinked back tears. "It will go to the memorial," she said, "to keep their memory alive." When Dorothy left, the air inside the cabin felt warmer, lighter, as if the act of truth itself had closed a door long left open. That night, Kaylee whispered into the air, "They finally know I didn't take it." The faintest laugh, gentle and free, echoed through the rafters. By spring, the cabin had become something no one expected. Cars began lining the dirt road on weekends. Families, students, and travelers came to see the restored home that had once terrified locals. The Daily Aestirian ran another feature, From Haunted to Holy, How One Woman Turned a Tragedy into Hope. Teachers began bringing classes to learn about the Hendricks family and the 1962 storm that shaped Oregon's history. But what drew people most wasn't the ghosts, it was Kaylee. Her story of loss, faith, and redemption resonated deeply. A woman from Eugene wrote that she had been fired unfairly from her job and nearly gave up until she heard Kaylee's story. A homeless man from Salem sent a letter saying he'd found the courage to start over after visiting the cabin. A teenager from Seaside said the story made her feel seen for the first time in years. Kaylee began to understand something profound. Kindness and recognition could heal wounds no exorcism ever could. The haunting had never been about terror. It was about being unseen, unheard, forgotten. The Hendricks family had cried for acknowledgement, not revenge. She saw herself in them. Both had been erased by others' neglect. Both had waited for someone to notice. The more she worked, the more she realized hauntings weren't always about ghosts. Sometimes they were the echoes of pain left unspoken, the weight of lives that ended without closure. Her own suffering as a maid, the rejection, the humiliation, the endless loneliness, had given her the heart to see theirs clearly. The cabin became her home and her purpose. She divided it into two parts. One half remained a memorial museum filled with photographs, letters, and records. The other half was a living space, simple, warm, and alive. Visitors often found her sitting on the porch, writing thank you notes or journaling stories people sent her from around the country. Donations trickled in steadily. She lived modestly but never again in fear. Each evening, as the sun disappeared behind the tree line, Kaylee would sit on the porch with a mug of tea and feel the quiet presence around her. Sometimes, when the wind moved through the trees, she could almost hear laughter, light, free, full of joy. "They're still here," she would whisper, "but they're not trapped anymore." Word spread far beyond Oregon. National news outlets picked up the story, calling it the miracle at Saddle Mountain. People began visiting not out of curiosity but reverence. Letters arrived daily, hundreds of them, from across the country. One woman from Philadelphia wrote that after watching Kaylee's story, she reached out to her sister after 15 years of silence. "You reminded me that no one deserves to be forgotten," she wrote. "We met last week. We're talking again." Kaylee cried when she read that letter. She realized the cabin's healing had extended far beyond its walls. It had become a ripple of compassion moving through countless unseen lives. Every person mattered. Every story deserved to be told. The greatest kindness wasn't grand or costly. It was simply saying, "I see you. I hear you. You matter." That was what the Hendricks family had needed, and what Kaylee herself had longed for when she was sleeping in her car, invisible to the world. The haunting was never about fear. It was about recognition, the desperate cry of forgotten souls, answered by someone who knew that pain too well. By choosing to stay, to listen, to remember, Kaylee healed not just them, but herself. Poverty and rejection had once defined her, but now her worth came from something deeper, the way she gave voice to silence, warmth to abandonment, and peace to restless hearts. As the years passed, the cabin remained a sanctuary. Children ran through the small garden she planted in memory of the Hendricks children. Couples left notes about forgiveness. Even skeptics admitted they felt something different there, a calm, steady peace that lingered long after they left. At night, when the visitors were gone and the lanterns burned low, Kaylee sat quietly on the porch. The forest sang softly around her. She sometimes heard faint footsteps on the wooden floorboards, a mother's gentle lullaby, the echo of children's laughter. None of it frightened her. It comforted her. Looking toward the granite plaque glowing under moonlight, she would smile and whisper, "Good night, Hendricks family. Sleep well. You're home now. We both are." The cabin had once been haunted by grief and silence. Now it was alive with memory and love, a place where the forgotten found peace and the living found purpose. Kaylee had turned horror into hope, not through wealth or power, but through compassion. Her greatest act of redemption was simple. She stayed, she listened, and she remembered. Because the worst haunting of all is to be forgotten. And the greatest kindness is to make sure that never happens again. Kindness doesn't require wealth. It only needs the courage to see others and acknowledge their worth. The greatest haunting isn't about ghosts or cursed places. It's the quiet ache that comes when someone's life, pain, or love is forgotten. The greatest kindness is making sure that never happens again to anyone, anywhere. Kaylee's story isn't about fear. It's about grace. She didn't have power, money, or comfort. What she had was heart. She looked at a broken house and saw people who once lived, laughed, and dreamed there. She listened to the silence that others avoided, and through her compassion, she turned it into peace. Where others saw a ruin, she built a home. Where others turned away, she stayed. The world often measures worth by wealth or status, but Kaylee proved that purpose is found in empathy. She showed that remembering someone, truly seeing them, is a sacred act. Through her, the Hendricks family found peace, and through them, countless others learned that no story is too small to matter. Every name, every life, every loss deserves light. Now, the cabin stands as a quiet promise, a place reborn through kindness. Its windows no longer stare into emptiness but shine with the warmth of remembrance. Visitors walk its creaking floors not with fear, but with gratitude. They come to feel something real, the unspoken truth that love, once given, never fades. Kaylee's journey teaches us that healing begins when we stop turning away from pain and start listening to it. That acknowledgement, I see you, I hear you, you matter, can change everything. It's what every forgotten soul longs for. It's what binds the living and the lost. So as the sun sets beyond the Oregon forest, and the cabin glows softly in the fading light, one truth remains clear. Compassion can resurrect even the most broken places. The maid who once had nothing left gave the world something priceless: hope. Kaylee's story reminds us that everyone deserves to be seen and remembered. What's the most powerful act of kindness you've ever witnessed? Share it in the comments below and tell us where you're watching from. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have more incredible true stories coming your way. Your likes, comments, and shares help us continue bringing these powerful messages to the world. Thank you for being part of our community.